Thinking Tactically is a paid program. The information provided is not legal advice and should not be used in lieu of legal counsel. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of West Coast Armory North or this station.
Every day, we hear stories of innocent people who are the victims of violent crimes. Do you want to leave your personal defense up to someone else? Or take the initiative and be responsible and prepared to defend yourself and your family? If you answered yes, this is the show for you. Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And now, here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Thinking Tactically, Personal Security for Today's World. I'm Kevin Smith.
And John Holshin.
All right, John. Well, today I know you've got some more lessons from the news. What do you got for us this week?
Yeah, I was looking at a number of different stories, and I realized that rather than focusing on a specific story, I think it's time to kind of look at what we learn from looking at a bunch of different situations, a bunch of different incidents that have happened. And really, I've kind of alluded to this before. These incidents fall into one or two general categories. You're either dealing with somebody that's temporarily or permanently off balance, whether that's somebody that's really angry, whether that's somebody that's under the influence of some substance, or whether it's somebody that's mentally ill. The fact is that they're acting out violently, and that's one kind of category. The other category are people that are going about their business that is committing crimes. They're using violence instrumentally to try and get what they want. But what we need to look at is, we look at these individual situations or these isolated incidents. What are the commonalities? Because the commonalities can bring us to the point of how do we approach this to make ourselves safer, more secure. And I like to think in terms of what I call personal security strategies. And there's four of them. They're awareness, avoidance, de-escalation, and disengagement. And awareness right off the bat, it's just a lot easier to deal with problems if you know you've got a problem. So what can we do to increase our awareness? Well, a lot of it is don't become what we call task fixated. In other words, you're there, trying to respond to that text message to somebody. So you're all your thoughts are right there. Maybe it's, your significant other and there's something important going on in life that you need to respond to. At that point, you're head down, not really aware of what you're doing. It can be as simple as you're walking to your car, out of the mall, and lady's digging in her purse trying to find where she put her keys. She might have been before that considering where she had to go next. And now here she is approaching her car. She doesn't have her keys in her hand yet. She's there staring in her purse trying to find them. And, that type of thing stands out, particularly to the bad guy that is the perpetrator of instrumental violence. He's the one that's more calculating. And he looks and he goes, hey, there's somebody that is not paying attention to what's going on around them. I can get up close to them and take advantage of that. So we need to avoid that. So awareness, two aspects. One is that active awareness, having your head up looking around. And the other is realizing not to allow yourself to get caught into some task fixation where all of your attention and awareness has come inward when you're out in public.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because I know the other day even I was sitting there looking at a text message and somebody in front of me was trying to hold the door open for me and I wasn't even paying attention.
Exactly. And then, that's the neat thing is this kind of stuff, and what we're going to talk about in the second segment also. This is the type of stuff that you actually use every day, where you talk about, a certain defensive tool or a certain defensive technique. And hopefully we don't get to use those very often or have to use those very often. But this type of stuff is the type of thing that you use every day of your life once you kind of get in the habit of it. And it just makes things go smoother, just like that, or not realizing that you're cutting somebody off. I did that the other day. I was thinking about something, and this guy paused, and we're in a parking lot driving, and car paused, and I thought, what the heck is he doing? And I kind of went on about what I was doing, and then after the fact I realized, yeah, he was waiting for a parking spot, and I was kind of rude. I didn't steal it, but if I'd realized what was going on, I would have waited and let him go first. But because I wasn't aware, I potentially irritated or angered somebody totally unintentionally.
Yeah, and everybody's been there too, where you have somebody that's not paying attention, that's in your way, or doing something that causes you to be uncomfortable or distracted as well.
Yeah. So the second strategy is avoidance. The obvious things are don't go to shady places at the wrong times. But that can be, it's not just what are really shady places. For example, thinking ahead to pay attention to the status of how much gas you have in your car, so that you're not having to stop in certain places, certain parts of town, after work, or in my case, I say after work, I'm 9:30, 10 o'clock at night heading home. And, if I had thought about it and got gas on the way in that day, I would have been exposed or potentially exposed to less potential hazardous situation than stopping at 10 o'clock at night, in that part of town, low light and shady people around. So avoidance isn't just about staying away from the known bad places. Your mom or dad might have told you, don't hang out in the bad places with bad people. But it's thinking ahead to manage your exposures.
Yeah, it's one of those where you got to remember that just because you want to get to where you're going earlier in the day as quick as you can, like you said with the gas, it may save you that uncomfortable situation later on if you just stop for that 5 minutes that it takes to fill up your tank.
Yeah, whatever it takes. Third strategy is de-escalation. And, this is one that, I don't know about you, but some days it seems like, just the number of stupid people in the world is constantly increasing, right? A lot of it is around vehicles and parking lots. And, I was coming out of a parking lot at the mall the other day, or trying to get out of the parking lot at the mall. And there are 10 or 12 cars all waiting for a stop sign, that there's a stop light immediately thereafter. And I needed to go the other way. But it was amazing how many people couldn't figure out to leave a gap so that the people could get out of the parking lot and get out of their way. But, when things begin to happen like that and tempers get short, it's really tempting to give a person, a piece of our mind. And it was a warm day. I had my windows down. And, I eventually motioned for somebody to please stop and let me through. And as I passed him, it happened to be a lady, and she made a rather rude comment. And, part of me so much wanted to point out to her about, there's actually laws about don't block intersections, lady. I shouldn't have to tell you not to pull out and block the intersection. But I didn't. And, we really need to think about, is it worth it? If we can keep de-escalation in mind rather than adding fuel to the fire, that's just a solid strategy.
Yeah, refraining from that certain finger when somebody cuts you off on the freeway, that sort of thing, is probably the smarter course.
Yeah, exactly. No matter how rude or ignorant they were, you really put yourself at potential risk these days. There's road rage incidents. There's just, you don't know. So really look for opportunities to de-escalate. In extreme situations, I have a few stories when I was traveling where I've apologized for things that I couldn't possibly have done. Total mistaken identity type thing. But it was a lot easier. Couldn't convince him I wasn't the right guy. It was a lot easier to just apologize. Again, it had to do with parking lots. He was sure I had cut him off for a parking spot, when in reality I was staying right across the street and I'd walked across the street. I hadn't driven anywhere in hours, so it definitely wasn't me that cut him off. But you know what? It was a lot easier to just say, oh, man, you're right. I'm really sorry. I should have paid more attention, and turn the conversation around.
Yeah, it's that avoidance and assessing the situation and realizing that it's not going to do you any good to get into a disagreement with someone over some trivial matter.
Absolutely. Fourth strategy is disengagement. And, even when we use force, we really need to think ahead as to what the purpose of using force is at the most extreme. And as a private citizen, I'm not there to arrest people. I'm not there to detain people. I really need to get disengaged. De-escalation can move right into disengagement. But, when it's over, or when you get the opportunity to make it over, take it and leave. It's amazing. I sometimes observe people that, yep, there it was, but they had to say one more thing, or they had to, or even if we look at some of the videos of incidents where somebody did have to use force, whether it was a physical strike, whether it was pepper spray, or even the firearm, get disengaged at the first opportunity. That doesn't mean flee the scene. It means move to a safe place. And if you've used force, you need to call the police, do so. But get disengaged at the first opportunity rather than staying there. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to keep ourselves from harm. Well, as long as you're in contact, there's the potential for injury and harm to come to you.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the tougher lessons to actually put into practice for people, is to not be so offended by whatever the situation was that you re-engage and you're constantly trying to win that situation in your mind, gain justice for whatever's happened to you, and that you realize that it's better to just walk away and make the appropriate decisions from there.
Absolutely. You know, at one level, I thoroughly believe that rudeness should be a punishable offense. But the fact of the matter is, if you go about your life with that as your primary thought, you're going to get into a lot of situations that could have been avoided. So it's just not where you want to go. So yeah, just to recap, so the personal security strategies: awareness, avoidance, de-escalation, and disengagement. You know, the thing to do is to think about those strategies in your life, your behaviors, your situations, and see how can you make improvements. What kind of planning can you do in advance? What kind of skill sets do you have or can you acquire that increase your capabilities in each one of those areas?
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you, John, for that. And we're going to take a quick break right here, and we're going to be right back. We're going to be talking about managing unknown contacts. So stay with us. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by West Coast Armory North, providing expert personalized service to each individual client. For more information, log on to westcoastarmorynorth.com. Insights Training Center is locally owned and nationally recognized and offers the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to civilians and private organizations, law enforcement, and military. In business for over 20 years, they've taught more than 20,000 private citizens, law enforcement officers, instructors, SWAT teams, corrections personnel, security officers, and military personnel, offering classes from basic self-defense and handgun safety to advanced tactic classes and everything in between. Insights Training Center has a course for you. Their professional instructors come from highly specialized and thorough backgrounds in law enforcement, military special operations, and the private sector. Visit InsightsTraining.com for a complete list of upcoming classes.
Maybe you've heard it before. Let's go fishing, or let's go for a boat ride. Being prepared by taking educational classes geared towards boaters and carrying necessary safety equipment can be the difference between catastrophe and minor inconvenience while boating. The Everett Sail and Power Squadron reminds you that now is the time to ready yourself and your boat for those long, enjoyable, and safe days on the water. For more information on safe boating, visit usps.org.
The Northwest Women's Shooting Network is a comprehensive resource in person and online for all women's shooting needs and questions. Everything from basic education to continuing education, we are here to help you find and buy the right gun for you, get the proper skills for personal protection, and to create a welcome and safe environment to learn with other women. Coming from over 30 years of combined experience in the shooting industry, we are mothers, sisters, wives, and just plain awesome gals. In other words, just like you. Our commitment is to help you become an informed, skilled, confident woman. We are based out of West Coast Armory North in Everett, Washington, minutes north of Seattle. We offer a variety of events, seminars, training, and more. Already we have hosted a variety of events such as Kids Safety Day, Ladies Night Out, and shopping events, and we also hold regular women-only classes in addition to our Ladies Shooting Club and Ladies League. At the range, we have over 70 rental firearms for you to try before you buy, and every Thursday is Ladies Day. Find us at westcoastarmorynorth.com under the Women's Network tab and on Facebook at Northwest Women's Shooting Network.
taking responsibility out of someone else's hands and putting it into yours. This is Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And now, back to more of the show. Here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. We're now going to be talking about managing unknown contacts. So, John, what do you got for us today?
Yeah, so the term managing unknown contacts is something that I have borrowed from an associate of mine, Craig Douglas. Craig and I met because, people put us in touch because we were both addressing these issues in one of very few people that are out there in the training community. And I didn't have a good name for it, frankly. And I think Craig hit the nail right on the head with managing unknown contacts. The issue here is that when you start trying to put things into context, I can give you different skills and develop different skills, but how to use them and where do they fit in? And this is just a real common thing. Maybe you're leaving a restaurant. It's fairly late in the evening. Maybe you had to park around the corner. And as you head towards your car, maybe with your significant other, you realize that someone is approaching. And you can tell at some point, hopefully a little further away than a little closer, that they are approaching you. They're not just walking by. Or, I saw this in a local parking lot here recently, just a grocery store parking lot, that there was a guy that was a panhandler that was working the parking lot. And I observed him for about 45 minutes, and then I made it to where he would approach me so that I could figure out what he was doing, what his spiel was. But it's the same thing. Here, he would walk up to people. He would wait until somebody was putting their groceries in the car, make an approach that kind of surprised him and put him a little off balance. And, there we go back to that awareness thing. But the issue here is at some point you'll realize that here comes this person that you probably don't really want to talk to. And we're not going to use this the same always, certain situations, certain times and places, middle of the day, the person walking up to you looks totally benign. I may handle that differently than, again, 9:30 at night, I'm coming out of someplace and somebody's coming around a corner, no real explanation for why they were even there to begin with. So, but the point is, what do we want to do here? And we want to have a structured approach to this. We want to understand what our objectives are and have the techniques and tools in place to deal with it. The first thing is I want to maintain distance. Why distance? Because distance equals time to make good assessments, time to decide on courses of action. So right off, I want to maintain distance. It's amazing, particularly if somebody has their car door open, they're putting stuff in the car, somebody walks up, they don't want to walk away from that, and they're hesitant to do so. We really need to assess that. If this situation looks scary enough, hey, backing up and walking away from it. But in any case, usually the first thing we're going to do is a verbal interaction. And I start with a simple request. Hey, would you hold it right there for a moment? Just letting him know that I want a little bit of boundary. You don't have to engage in conversation with strangers if you don't want to.
No. Isn't that what your parents taught you?
Exactly.
Don't talk to strangers.
So, we get to make that decision, and I don't want that guy getting right up on top of me while I'm making that decision. So while I make that request, that's what I say verbally or something. It has to fit your personality. All of this stuff, you have to figure out the exact phrases that fit your personality and your situation, what the mores are in the area that you're in, that sort of thing. In some places, you can be a little more direct than that. And you can say, in some places, it's totally appropriate to say, hey, don't come up on me like that. Stop right there, right off the bat. But in most cases, we're going to start off with just that simple request. So how we make that request is important also. We want to make sure that our body language is congruent with the message that we want to send. So when I make that request, my hands are going to come up in front of me, kind of a pushing away motion, my hands moving away from my body a little bit, saying, hey, hold on right there. Hey, would you mind staying right there for a moment? Just something that lets them know, hey, I'm not comfortable with you approaching me. So his behavior now is a clue for my next step. Does he continue to encroach upon, me? Most people, when they see the hands come up in front and you say, hey, hold on a second, or would you stay right there for a moment? They realize, hey, I'm making this person uncomfortable, and they're going to stop if they're a normal average person
Yeah,
that
if
doesn't have an agenda.
If their intentions are pure to say,
Mm-hmm.
then normally with somebody tells you, hey, hold up, and they're looking a little uncomfortable, you're going to stop and you're going to apologize and you're going to explain why you're coming up to them.
Exactly.
Somebody that's not on the up and up, that's not pure intentions, that's where you're going to learn a little bit more right away.
Yeah, if they continue to encroach upon my space and my comfort zone, it tells me one of two things. Either they're unaware of normal social conventions. That could mean that they're from a different culture. That could mean that they are one of these people, again, under the influence of something. They're temporarily or permanently off balance. Or it can mean they're absolutely aware, but they don't care.
That's the scariest part.
That's the scary one, right? They're aware that you're uncomfortable and you want them to stay back, but they're going to encroach anyway. And that leads me right to, if I don't get the desired results from a simple request, now I'm going to escalate to a command. And we want to use command volume here and command presence. And it may be as simple as stop right there. Right? Or it may be, don't be coming up on me like that. But in any case, I'm going to raise that volume right up to a 10, and I'm going to give a very clear command. It can be as simple as stop or stop right there. I like to give right there because we're talking about space, and they understand, should understand absolutely what's going on. At this point, I'm probably stepping back, a little quick glance over my shoulder if they're not in arm's reach. But in general, I don't want to move directly backwards, right? If you're stuck between two cars in a parking lot, you got no ability to move sideways. You've got to back up. But in general, what I really want to do is kind of make an arcing motion, kind of leads to something we always want to do at some point in this, which I call turn it 90 degrees. We want to pivot that conversation. Why? So I can see if he's got an accomplice. I can see if somebody else is involved in this thing. So I don't want to take my eyes off of this guy, particularly if he's in arm's reach. That might be his opportunity for him to strike me. But I want to get my peripheral vision looking at what was behind me. So I want to move. If I'm facing him at 12, I want to kind of pivot toward my 9 or 3 with my back so that the what was behind me is now in my peripheral vision.
Yeah.
You know, this is the time we might do something that your mom probably told you never to do, and that's use profanity. And some people take exception to that. Some instructors say, oh, no, you should never, you should never go there. You should never stoop to their level, that sort of thing. That is their normal vocabulary. They understand it. They respond to it. And there's a time for it. There's a time to say, I said, back the blank up, right? To drop the F-bomb or whatever it may be. It's still, now there's a difference here. Don't insult him. We're not talking about calling him names. I'm talking about using profanity for emphasis. Right? And that's and if you're not comfortable with it, don't do it, because you have to look natural in any of this. You have to sound natural.
Yeah, and if you don't curse and use profanity in your everyday life, probably not the best time to start using it.
Exactly. But the fact of the matter is, it's part of their vocabulary. It's they understand it, and we're trying to communicate. Sometimes it helps to speak in the language that the person you're trying to communicate will understand.
Well, and a lot of times the tone, when you said volume up to 10, that type of a thing, plus the gestures, it doesn't matter the language at that point. Most people, most cultures understand that raised voice and that type of body language is enough to know that you're uncomfortable. So if they're continuing, it's not because of a language barrier. It's
exactly. That's a great point, is just that. Because that's the next thing we need to consider, is if he's still coming closer, what is this about? And you're absolutely right. It could be a language barrier. It could be he truly doesn't understand, but body language is universal.
Yeah, body language and volume.
Exactly. So, absolutely. So, what we've done so far, we're trying to maintain distance. It might involve a little pivoting on my part and moving away from him. And we've gone from a simple request to escalating to a command to potentially adding profanity. If he's still moving, and all of this, when I say it, I have to list it one thing after the next. But in reality, these next two things I'm going to talk about, I've been doing from the very beginning. And that is, I'm thinking about two things. One, is he armed? If so, with what? And what kind of motions would he need in order to employ it? And secondly is, does he have an accomplice or more than one accomplice? Is there more than one of them? So I'm really doing this from the very beginning, but if you got kind of locked up in the previous part and didn't do it, you better start doing it now. So first thing is, where are his hands? Are they in view? Is there anything in them? Is he keeping it out of view, whereas in a pocket where he might have a weapon? If he's got his hands in a pocket, what kind of weapon could come out? Well, a knife or a gun could come out, potentially pepper spray or an impact weapon, but probably not. Conversely, if he's got something in his hands that could be used as a weapon, even if it's not one. He's holding a bottle. How's he holding it? Is he holding a big bottle by the neck? Obviously, something like a cane, a staff, things like that could be used to strike. So I'm thinking about, does he have a weapon? That leads me right to, where are his hands? What are his hands doing? What type of motion might I be seeing here if he's going to employ a weapon?
Yeah, no, and that's something where you're always going to be aware, especially if you're in an uncomfortable situation, of what is going on with the person coming up to you. Where are his hands at, like you said? What's the danger assessment that's going on?
Right, but that is not a natural response or reflex for us. When we're faced with stress, you look at videos and people lock in on the face. They lock in on the face. They lock into eye contact. You have to train yourself to look for the hands. You won't do it naturally. Most people will not do it unless they've given themselves that idea in advance. So the hands, as I like to say, the hands are the weapons platform of the human body. That's what is going to harm me, is what's in his hands for the most part.
All right.
And then the second piece we kind of touched on already. If I haven't done it prior to now, I absolutely need to be turning this thing 90 degrees, either with an arcing motion or a pivoting motion, to assess, is there another assailant? At some point now, we've tried to maintain a distance and we've tried to assess. At some point, I may need to take the initiative. I don't want to maintain this responsive relationship with this guy, because the fact is, action always beats reaction. If he gets to start it, I'm playing catch up. So I really need to be thinking about, how do I gain the initiative here? What's cover nearby? I may start moving toward it. Is it time to just flat out run? Right? Is it time to don't be too proud? Is it time to just run to a safer place, back where you came from? If it's scary enough, that may be the thing to do. What tools do you have? Do you have pepper spray? If so, where is it? How about getting your hand on the pepper spray, getting it oriented in your pocket so that if you need to employ it, you're going to be able to get your hand out and employ it quickly. At some point, if his behavior is such that you believe he has a weapon and he's behaving in a way that indicates he might be getting ready to use it, it might be appropriate for you to grip your holstered weapon if you, in fact, are carrying a handgun, concealed pistol licensee. It might be appropriate to grip. Are you brandishing at that point? Yes, technically, actually, you are. Any motion that would put someone at fear of you using a weapon is technically brandishing, whether it comes out of the holster or not. But we're talking about here, this has escalated because of his behavior, that I'm right on the edge of thinking I need my gun in my hand. But the fact of the matter is, a draw stroke, starting with your hand on the gun, is a lot faster than a draw stroke starting with your hands up in front of you, particularly if you're talking a concealed draw that you have to get through clothing to get there. So there's times that it may be time to put my hand on my gun. I had a situation like that a number of years ago now. I stopped after a class. I was traveling. I was in Pennsylvania. And as I pulled into a little kind of a 7-Eleven type store, I was going to get a snack to take back to the room with me. And I saw this guy that kind of looked shady hanging around. So I paused. I didn't get out of the car right away. I looked at him, and he kind of looked at me, and then he walked away. And then he walked down, turned the corner, and I thought, oh, okay, he's gone. So I got out a minute or so later. I went in, did my shopping. I came back out, and because of what I had seen on the way in, I was a little more aware, and I'm scanning. And I look to my right, and I don't see him. And I look to my left, and I don't see him. I start moving, and I had parked almost right in front of the door. And as I take a second step out and glance back to my right, he was there. And where he was, The only place he could have come from was he had to have been crouched between two cars, because he couldn't have got from around the building to where he appeared in the amount of time that I had looked away and looked back. So now all of a sudden this guy is there that obviously was concealing himself. But I'm only a step or two from my car, and he's 10 or 12 steps from me. My judgment, I'm going to be able to get in the car before he gets there. So I do. I open the door, I slide in, I close the door. Sure enough, he's just turning the corner coming down to my door. As he comes down to my door, leans over, starts to tell me something about how his car is broken down. I glance to my right, and here comes another one coming up to the passenger side. And he has his hands in his pocket in a way that frankly looked to me like he was likely to have a weapon. So now I have two people at opposite windows, one at my driver's side window, one at the passenger side window. And it's 10 o'clock at night, and that was enough for me to grasp my gun. I swept my covering concealment garment out of the way. I grasped the grip of my pistol. As I'm looking to my left, I look to my right. The guy to my right's eyes got big as saucers, and he popped up out of my window. He'd been leaning over looking in, and all of a sudden he stood up. I couldn't see his face anymore. I'm kind of looking at his chest, but he's backpedaling. I look back to the left. The guy on my left is backpedaling, and poof, they both disappear around the building. What was that about? I really don't know for sure, but I was comfortable, if I had to explain it in terms of legal terms, that approach was threatening enough that it was reasonable for me to place my hand on the grip of my pistol. I didn't draw it at that moment, but he saw it, and that was enough that they decided they wanted to be somewhere else.
Well, and, it's better to wonder what that situation might have been than to be knowing full well what was going to happen there.
Absolutely. That is one of my principles. I would much rather be at home after the event, wondering if it really was what I thought it was, than staying in the event long enough to confirm it. Absolutely. Yep. So that's really, just to kind of recap, that is managing unknown contacts. Maintain distance, make an assessment. At some point, you need to take initiative to break the contact, whether it's closing your door if you're, the situation you weren't in your car yet, and moving away, hitting the lock as you go, whether it's running back in. At some point, we want to move to where we are not reacting to their actions, but are choosing a course of action that will make us safer.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to be talking about the types of training to be looking for. So stay with us. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by Insights Training Center, offering the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to citizens, private organizations, law enforcement, and military. Online at insightstraining.com.
Every day, there are men and women of our armed forces dealing with illness and injuries, and their families are unable to be by their side. Fisher House works to get the families of injured military members to their soldiers during these difficult times. They provide housing and transportation to help make certain our soldiers are not alone. Visit fisherhouse.org to see how you can make a difference in the lives of the brave men and women of our armed forces that have sacrificed so much for us. Those of us at Thinking Tactically and West Coast Armory North are proud to support Fisher House.
West Coast Armory North is known for its low prices and great customer service, but did you know we have training classes as well? In fact, we're introducing a new course, Handgun 101, designed with new and returning shooters in mind. Our Handgun 101 course is 3 hours long, covers handgun marksmanship, how to load, unload, and safely handle and fire a variety of handguns. All equipment is provided, and you'll leave with a free bronze membership to our range. All this for just $75. Sign up now on our website under the Classes tab at westcoastarmorynorth.com.
Want to help save Puget Sound? Try cutting back on the amount of lawn fertilizer you use. What's the connection? Most fertilizers contain herbicides and pesticides meant to kill weeds and lawn pests. However, applying too much or before a heavy rain means these chemicals might wash into local streams where they kill plants and the good bugs that salmon depend on. These chemicals make their way to Puget Sound and do more damage. So check the weather before you apply. Cut back on the amount you use. You'll save time, money, and help Puget Sound. Remember, Puget Sound starts here.
Welcome back to the radio show dedicated to information and education about defending yourself. Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Once again, here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Thinking Tactically, Personal Security for Today's World. So, John, we've had some discussions about training and different things throughout the first few episodes, and what we're wanting to talk about is what type of level or what type of training should somebody be looking at if they're, say, just beginning in training?
Sure. So, I prioritize, like we do most things. Number one is firearms safety. If we're talking about firearms training here, number one has got to be safety, and it needs to be inherent in everything you do with the gun. We build that in, and you come to our classes, and that's the first topic we cover in every class, no matter how many classes you've been to, is we're going to review the Universal Firearms Handling Rules and what that means, how you apply it, and we apply it consistently throughout the training, because that's how we're going to learn safe gun handling. So number one is safety. Number two is you're looking for what we call gun handling, and that really is familiarity with your firearm. So that, the best analogy that I have is driving a car. At first, when you're driving a car, you have to think a lot about the 方. You have to think about, how do I press the brake enough but not too hard, stop where I want to stop without, skidding or overrunning the line on the pavement. And a bunch of other nuances. How do I turn, the right amount and not end up in the other lane? With a little bit of time, you don't think about that stuff. And the driving the car is handled subconsciously, which allows you, hopefully, not to daydream and solve your work-related problems and so on, but hopefully it allows you to pay attention to what's going on around you more, the driving conditions, the pedestrian that might step out, the kid that might be chasing the ball and not see you. It frees your mind up to handle the situation. We need to do the same thing with gun handling and ultimately with marksmanship. We want to be able to employ our gun, get it out of wherever it's stored, or make a good draw stroke if you're carrying concealed, and then get good hits in a reasonably short period of time without having to think a lot about how the gun works and what it takes to get those good hits, because we want to free our mind up to deal with the tactics of the situation, the reality of what's going on around us. So that brings us to that second thing is gun handling and marksmanship. Third is use of force decision making has got to be part of your training program. I train with a lot of people all over the country. I present and co-teach with them. I attend their classes as a student to continue to add to my knowledge. And, there are folks out there, for example, right now, if you really get into the commercial training community, there are a number of highly qualified former military people coming from special operations units in particular that are teaching in the civilian sector now, teaching, firearm skills. And that's awesome. These guys really know a lot about how to run a gun, obviously. Some of them are more practiced at teaching than others, but that's another topic. But, some of them even, you'll hear them say it, and you can find some videos out there on YouTube where they say, I don't get into the legalities at all. I'm not a lawyer, and I stay in my lane. I don't get out of my lane. I understand where they're coming from, and I applaud their approach. However, I believe if you are teaching private citizens about concealed carry and self-defense, you don't need to be a lawyer. The same way I'm not a doctor, but I understand the tactical treatment of gunshot wounds, and I can teach first aid. We need to understand the legalities of use of force to the level that we can educate people in the basic understanding of use of force and use of deadly force. We're practicing how to shoot people, frankly. If you are not also able to talk about legalities at that level, you're missing something, or students are missing something. So as a student, that's something that I look at as well. Can they talk to the legalities? Because the legalities tie in with the decision-making process, and that's really important. Next comes tactics, really understanding how to manage space, time, and distance. And that is all about in many cases, not having to use the gun. Our strategies of personal defense are awareness, avoidance, de-escalation, and disengagement. And the only place that I'm using force at all, whether it's striking someone, pepper spraying someone, or shooting someone, is after awareness, avoidance, and de-escalation have failed me. So it's in the disengagement phase. Notice I said disengagement. I'm not moving to contact. This isn't a military search and destroy mission. We need to understand what we're trying to do. So that really are my priorities. And just to recap, it's safety number 1, gun handling and marksmanship number 2, use of force decision making, which includes the legalities and some mental preparedness, is number 3. 4th is tactics. And that's really, if you are looking at developing a robust self-defense capability, you need to seek training that covers all of those topics, in my opinion.
Okay. So it's about making certain that you're finding somewhere that's going to teach you not just how to fire a firearm, but to make sure that it's proper steps of how to handle it, the legalities involved in it, and making sure that it's a well-rounded training course, not just one specific topic.
Absolutely. You know, I spend a lot of time in various courses on a topic that I call communication for self-defense. And that is making people aware of what they're communicating consciously and unconsciously through both verbal interaction and body language, and awareness or lack of awareness, and how it reflects in their body language, and how prospective criminals look at that. There's some great material out there. There's been some great studies. There have been some input by former violent criminals, and it all comes down to in many cases, there's a selection process to become a victim, and you want to know what that process consists of and how to fail that.
That's not a test you want to get or to pass.
Exactly. That's an interview that you want to fail.
That sounds good.
So that's, if we're going to talk self-defense, that's important. That's important stuff. The best outcome is to not have to use force of any type, because the fact of the matter is there's 3 battles we need to be prepared for. We like to say that we believe that you should ensure your techniques, tactics, training, and equipment are optimized to win the following 3 battles. First is a physical encounter. Obviously, if you end up dead, the other 2 don't matter. However, secondly is the legal encounter. There are many situations that you could decisively win by the use of excessive force. You have won the first encounter, the physical encounter, and you're guaranteed to lose the second encounter, and now you end up in prison, and that is not a win in our book. Third is the moral, ethical dilemma. You got to live with yourself. You need to live with yourself, and you might say, look, I'm comfortable that I'll do what I need to do, and it's not going to bother me. Okay, but you've got other people in your life. Is it going to bother them? What about your kids? What about your wife? What about when your friends are now, they're reacting to you differently because they just don't know. Do I talk about this bad thing that happened or not? When all of that happens around you, you need to know that you made the correct decision and you used force as it was needed. And not more than was needed. So, again, we want to prepare you to win all 3 of those battles.
All right, sounds good. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about we're going to be answering some questions that we've received, and in particular, one about ammunition and storage of ammunition. So stay with us. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by West Coast Armory North, providing expert personalized service to each individual client. For more information, log on to westcoastarmorynorth.com. Insights Training Center is locally owned and nationally recognized and offers the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to civilians and private organizations, law enforcement, and military. In business for over 20 years, they've taught more than 20,000 private citizens, law enforcement officers, instructors, SWAT teams, corrections personnel, security officers, and military personnel, offering classes from basic self-defense and handgun safety to advanced tactic classes and everything in between. Insights Training Center has a course for you. Their professional instructors come from highly specialized and thorough backgrounds in law enforcement, military special operations, and the private sector. Visit insightstraining.com for a complete list of upcoming classes.
The Northwest Women's Shooting Network is a comprehensive resource in person and online for all women's shooting needs and questions. Everything from basic education to continuing education, we are here to help you find and buy the right gun for you, get the proper skills for personal protection, and to create a welcome and safe environment to learn with other women. Coming from over 30 years of combined experience in the shooting industry, we are mothers, sisters, wives, and just plain awesome gals. In other words, just like you. Our commitment is to help you become an informed, skilled, confident woman. We are based out of West Coast Armory North in Everett, Washington, minutes north of Seattle. We offer a variety of events, seminars, training, and more. Already we have hosted a variety of events such as Kids Safety Day, Ladies Night Out, and shopping events, and we also hold regular women-only classes in addition to our Ladies Shooting Club and Ladies League. At the range, we have over 70 rental firearms for you to try before you buy, and every Thursday is Ladies Day. Find us at westcoastarmorynorth.com under the Women's Network tab and on Facebook at Northwest Women's Shooting Network.
Every day, there are men and women of our armed forces dealing with illness and injuries, and their families are unable to be by their side. Fisher House works to get the families of injured military members to their soldiers during these difficult times. They provide housing and transportation to help make certain our soldiers are not alone. Visit fisherhouse.org to see how you can make a difference in the lives of the brave men and women of our armed forces that have sacrificed so much for us. Those of us at Thinking Tactically and West Coast Armory North are proud to support Fisher House.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Heard every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on Fox Sports 1380. Once again, here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And John, some of the questions that we've been getting lately are about ammunition, and in particular, storing ammunition with how long is it good for? If it's sitting in your garage for long periods of time, does that affect the quality of the ammunition? And also, like if you're storing it in a magazine, does that affect the bullet? Does that affect the way that things work? And so those are some of the questions that we've been getting lately is with regards to ammunition. So I was hoping you could help our listeners get a better understanding of how long ammunition is good for and when to be concerned.
Yeah, so the most critical thing there is to plan ahead in how you're storing ammunition. If ammunition is stored in a climate-controlled environment, and the biggest thing there really is humidity, but if it's stored in a normal household environment, indoor environment, we don't really know how long modern ammunition is going to be good. I can tell you that when I went through the Special Forces Weapons Sergeant course in 1989, we shot ammunition, some .303 British ammo that had been manufactured in 1942. So that ammunition was 47 years old. We had zero malfunctions. It all functioned absolutely perfectly. Now it had been properly packaged and properly stored. If it was left out in the garage and it got real humid, then that might be the case. So what we want to do, if you've got older ammunition, you want to examine it, obviously, inspect it. So the first thing I'm looking for is corrosion. Is there any obvious corrosion on the brass? It'll turn kind of greenish sometimes. And or if you're talking exposed lead bullets, they'll get kind of a white, almost like a dried salt look on them. If I see either of those, I'm not going to use it. All right, that's to start with. Obviously, anything that's misshapen. Another thing you can do, particularly if you have a semi-automatic handgun that you're talking about shooting this stuff in, is take the barrel out and just drop the cartridges one at a time. Just drop them in the barrel. And if they seat properly, if they seat flush, then you know that the ammunition is not bulged or having any misshapen in any way that it won't chamber well. At the same time, I also want to look at it. If it's been stored, depending upon If it was stored bullets down and over time the box that it was in kind of compressed and there was weight on top of it, like you had a stack of boxes and some of them were upside down, you can actually get the bullet being pushed back into the case. And if that bullet is pushed back into the case, it's going to create potentially pressure spikes when it's fired. You're going to increase because the volume in the case is not what it should be, and you can get pressure spikes. And that can happen. It doesn't have to be old ammunition for that to happen. That can happen with new ammunition. So if you're examining it, you want to look at overall length, and different cartridges are loaded, different manufacturers, different bullet weights, even in the same caliber, will have different overall lengths. But within a box, if you see short overall length, the bullet is pushed back, we don't want to shoot those. Obviously, if you see any cracks in the case or anything like that. But in general, properly stored modern ammunition, again, we don't really know how long it's good for because we know it's good for 30 or 40 years at least.
Okay, so one of the keys to that then obviously is how you're storing it. That's
Absolutely.
What's leading to the malfunctions or the issues with your bullets is how are you storing it? Is it in a humidity controlled environment, or is it just something that you've left out in the shed for 10 years?
Sure. And in general, like here in the Pacific Northwest, unless you live on the coast, yeah, we get some humidity, but it's in the house generally. There's enough heat and so on to keep the humidity at bay. We really don't see extreme deterioration in reasonable amounts of time. A related question that comes up has to do with loaded magazines, and is it safe to keep my magazines loaded? And what people mean usually is something are they going to detonate or something? Of course, that isn't the case. But really, what they want to know is, will the gun function properly? Also, during my Special Forces Weapons Sergeant course, we shot some magazines that had been preloaded during or just after the Korean War. These were 30-round stick magazines designed to go in an M3 submachine gun, commonly called a grease gun because it looks sort of like the grease gun that a mechanic uses to grease Zerk fittings. And these magazines had been loaded for over 35 years, approaching 40 years when I went through the course. And they all, again, functioned flawlessly. A good friend of mine actually has an advanced degree from MIT in materials engineering. He's a shooter, a competitive shooter as well. And I asked him about this. I said, what's the real deal? Because there's so much conflicting information. And what he pointed out is he said, a spring, the majority of its wear comes from being compressed and then elongated. If it's made of good quality spring steel, spring metal, just having it compressed, really, it takes a set to a certain degree, but it'll last a long, long time. And the greatest amount of wear is in the last, say, 10 to 20% of compression of that spring. So if you really want to make your magazines last a long time, don't load them to full capacity. Download a high-capacity magazine. I might download it 2 rounds, a 17-rounder to 15 or a 15-rounder to 13. And a single-stack magazine, a 6 or 8-round magazine, I'll download 1. So my guns that stay loaded all the time, that's what I do. My Glock 19 has a 15-round magazine, and I typically load it to 14. Chamber 1, and then I've got 13 in that, or I might go ahead and top off 1 back into it, bring it back to 14. But in general, I'm running those magazines at 13 or 14 rounds, never at 15. And that's probably an excess of caution in all honesty. You probably would be fine going ahead, but the way I look at it, in most civilian settings, I'm going to be able to solve the problem with that many rounds, and I've got a spare magazine. If I'm carrying concealed, I'm carrying a spare magazine as well.
Yeah, and if you're at that type of situation where you're needing more than 2 rounds at 14 apiece, you're probably in a very bad situation.
If I'm in that situation, I'm looking to upgrade my weaponry at the first opportunity, such as, did the bad guys bring anything better than what I have? We call that battlefield recovery where I come from.
There you go.
Yeah. So no, your old ammunition is good, and no worries about leaving those magazines loaded in your ready gun.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm glad we were able to answer that to our listeners a little bit, and just make sure that you're storing that in a proper manner and that you're not leaving it in a varying humidity situation where it can corrode the bullets and the ammunition.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for us this week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Thinking Tactically, Personal Security for Today's World. And we want to remind you that if you have any questions that you'd like to hear answered, please email us at thinkingtactically@gmail.com. That's thinkingtactically@gmail.com, and we'll try to get to your questions next week. And to find more information about the show, go to westcoastarmorynorth.com or check out West Coast Armory North's Facebook page. Or stop by the store in South Everett. They're open Tuesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., so stop on by and check out what's going on at the shop. We also want to wish all the mothers a very happy Mother's Day tomorrow. And remember that if you bring your moms down to West Coast Armory North, moms shoot free on Mother's Day. And remember to tune in next week right here on Fox Sports 1380 at 9 a.m. for Thinking Tactically, Personal Security for Today's World. Until next week, stay safe.